witchcraft, demonology, persecution, and religious psychosis. These are just some of the themes explored in the 1922 film Haxan. Directed by Danish filmmaker Benjamin Christiansen, this film is a very early example of documentary filmmaking, showing the history of witchcraft and persecution of alleged witches by Christian officials throughout the European continent. Even now, 104 years later, the film is still relevant in its analysis of perceived witches and demons, our understanding of mental health, and the Christian hypocrisy in regards to treating outsiders. It's Christiansen's courage to openly discuss said topics and the truly imaginative depiction of Satan and demons that make this one of the most progressive and thought-provoking movies of the silent era. So join me as we look into the history presented in this classic, how it holds up today, what we can and should take away from it, and also its legacy in the eyes of silent film history. This is Haxan. The day is September 28th, 1879, in the Danish village of Viborg. It's here where the story of Benjamin Christiansen begins. From what we know of his early life, he was the youngest of 12 children, and his folks had enough money to send him to college to study medicine. Fortunately for film buffs, the showbiz buck had other plans, and he soon left his studies to pursue opera singing. He attended the Royal Danish Theatre School of Acting, working in the same group as Clara Pontoppidan and Paul Roymert, who, like Christiansen, would enter the acting world later on as well. He made his stage debut in 1902, gaining praise from critics both for his performances and his work as a stage director. 4 years later, however, he got into a heated argument during a party with his fellow theater directors and actors. He soon left the theater and took up wine selling for the next few years. He'd returned to acting in 1911, now in the new Danish film industry, beginning this new chapter of his career at Dania Biofilm, with one notable role he did during this time being Big Claus in an adaptation of Hans Christian Andersen's Little Claus and Big Claus. Sadly, from what I've been able to find, no existing copies of his performances before taking up directing survive in 2026. Now at Dank's Biograph Caponi, he take up the role of a director with the 1914 film The Mysterious X, also known as Sealed Orders. The plot centers on a lieutenant played by Christiansen who's wrongfully convicted of treason. We see an early example of contrasting lights and shadows, with several shots being lit by backlights. This, combined with the themes of injustice and a wrongful conviction, would in no doubt lay the groundwork for Haxan 8 years later. For now, though, he was working on his next project, cranking out 1916's Blind Justice, where he portrays an innocent convict who seeks revenge on a woman who he thinks betrayed him, resulting in his arrest. It's a heartbreaking film, with his performance as the convict making you pity and fear him at the same time. The studio would also promote the film by showcasing Christiansen's change from a director to the convict on posters. Jump to 1919, and he moved yet again to another studio, this one being Svenska Biograph Teatern. He'd given up the wine business and took up making movies for a full-time career. He also got his hands on a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, or The Hammer of Witches in English, which was the main manual for torturing and hunting witches throughout the Middle Ages. This was where he began researching on the history of witchcraft, demons, and the treatment of alleged witches by the Catholic Church, which would result in his decision to create Haxan. He kept the project under wraps while researching for the next few years, working hard in both his research on demonology and witchcraft, and creating what's truly one of the most memorable films of the 1920s. And despite making several more films during his career, with a notable one being the 1926 film Mockery, starring silent film juggernaut Lon Chaney, Haxan has become his most iconic film. In fact, it's the only one that most people know him for today, which that just sucks. And obviously this isn't Haxan's fault, it's just a common thing that happens when you look at many icons from this period. Let's briefly touch on Lon Chaney again as an example. For many, he's best remembered for his roles in Universal's The Hunchback of Notre Dame and The Phantom of the Opera, which are very incredible films, yes, but there's a reason why he was nicknamed during his day and is still remembered in 2026 as the Man of 1,000 Faces. Between the years of 1913 and 1930, he appeared in around 157 movies. He was able to blend himself into any role Hollywood gave to him, both because of his makeup skills and his natural talent. With some of his best roles during the 1920s other than Hunchback and Notre Dame, including Tell It to the Marines, He Who Gets Slapped, While the City Sleeps, and The Unholy Three, both the silent version from 1925 and the talkie remake released just before his death in 1930. And as I've mentioned in my other films talking about silent movie history, the rise in the internet has provided audiences with the easiest resource for learning of and experiencing cinema in its very early days. It's not always in the highest quality, and it's sometimes iffy in terms of the less remembered stars for what you're able to find, but when you get a chance to find some films and to watch them and learn a little bit of history, it's a joy to behold. The best way to describe Haxan is a fictionalized documentary, which, yes, does sound like an oxymoron, but here's the thing. By 1922, the art of filmmaking had only been around for a little more than 30 years. In fact, Nanook of the North, the film widely considered to be the first true documentary, was also released that year, so this was absolutely new ground Christiansen and his cast were walking in. The film is split into 7 chapters, with the first 2 paraphrasing the history of demons and witchcraft and our perception of them throughout the Middle Ages. 3 and 5 tackling the church's persecution of alleged witches and the methods used to obtain confessions, while the last 2 parts emphasize our new understanding of mental health issues and its part in spreading witch hysteria. So while the specific events portrayed in Haxan may be fictional, the history behind them is anything but. This, again in my subjective opinion, also helps Haxan stand out from other horror movies of its time. Works like Caligari and Nosferatu, for example, were allegories for the trauma and destruction from World War I. And even then, there's countless ways to interpret their works and the messages of the filmmakers intended that are still discussed today. And while Haxan also has many ways to be interpreted, it also makes clear what demons and witches represent. A dark time in human history where we allowed our ignorance to permit persecution and the murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. One of the things that make the witch trials so heartbreaking is the perspective of those who carried them out. When the church is introduced, the lead monk is visited by a vision of Satan played by Christiansen. Right off the bat, Haxan makes one thing abundantly clear. The people committing the acts of torture, execution, and even the acts of whipping each other to purify themselves weren't pompous, corrupt stereotypes that many might think of. They were people who truly believed that everything they did was a part of God's plan, that the devil and witches were real threats to humanity and needed to be stomped out by any means necessary. And the main source for their criteria for hunting witches and how to properly identify them was the Malleus Maleficarum, the same book that Christiansen purchased in 1919. Originally, it was written in 1486 by German author Heinrich Kramer, who also served as an inquisitor during the medieval era. And the book wasn't just one of the most influential for creating witch hysteria, but was also adopted by the Catholic Church as the official rulebook for fighting against alleged pacts with the devil. It was a violent and inexcusable moment in human history, with 100,000 people being accused and charged for alleged witchcraft and use of dark magic during the 1400s and 1700s. and 40 to 60,000 of those were executed in horrific fashion, with one of the most famous victims of these trials being German farmer Peter Stumpp. In 1589, he was accused of being a werewolf following the murder of local townsfolk. His trial is a key example of how, under the methods these hunters used, like strapping him to a rack or just beating the heck out of him, you could get someone during this time to confess to literally anything. In Stumpp's case, he confessed not only to being a werewolf, but having made a pact with the devil at 12 years old. He claimed to have killed 14 women and 2 children by eating them from their mother's womb. Again, I really can't stress enough, he confessed to all of this under torture. So I think it's safe to say he probably wasn't a werewolf and was maybe just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But nevertheless, he was executed on Halloween alongside his daughter. His body was cut into pieces before he was finally beheaded, and his head was put on a pole by local authorities, making a clear example of what the church would do if anyone dared to engage in any form of devil worship, or at least be accused of it. But how could the church be okay with this? How could they give the green light to centuries of accusations, brutal interrogations, and executions? Especially since all of this literally goes against the fundamental ideas of thou shalt not kill, loving your neighbor, and embracing the stranger in a strange land. First off, great question, you rockstar. And second, the answer is actually really simple. You see, everyone involved, from the officials greenlighting the hunts to the actual hunters and the inquisitors, were... oh, how should I put this? Really stupid! Like, they thought a witch had to have their feet on the ground to use their powers kind of stupid. Like, a real witch wouldn't be able to cry kind of stupid. And even then, they don't follow their own rules half the time. When they're interrogating an alleged witch in the movie and she begins to cry, what does the head monk say? She put something on her face. When? Did you not properly search her? Are all of you watching the same person? Is there truly nothing that could change your mind? Okay, the last question I know the answer for, but you get my point. When you combine religious dogma with not just ignorance, but pride in your ignorance, and an organization that ruled over the land for the longest time, you create a perfect recipe for disaster. It's easy to forget it's only been in the last couple hundred years where the right to openly question religions like Christianity without the fear of being killed by the government has become a common thing. An obvious example with the Founding Fathers, when they finally separated from England, becoming the first to establish a nation on the belief that church and state must be separate. And to this day, we still see the harm from these beliefs in the modern world. Whether it's the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the rise of Christian nationalism in general over the past decade, Oklahoma Republicans using the Bible to justify child marriage.
How old was Mary when she married Joseph?
Or the countless, and I mean countless, stories of religious officials and Christians in general still being caught in abuse scandals. Like, honestly, just do a Google search and see all the stories that still pop up about that to this very day. Wow. That was a heavy couple of minutes there. Let's go back to nerding out. I love Haxan. It's one of those movies I regret not watching sooner, since it's now among my all-time favorite films. The scenes with demons and witches dancing and flying in the night sky aren't just visually incredible, but also add an almost fairy tale element, which I would argue perfectly harmonizes with Haxan's analysis of the brutal reality of witch hunts and persecution. And while this movie may not appeal to everyone, I think it's still a solid option for introducing people to silent movies. It's a media that rewards its viewers for paying attention to what's laid out before them and allows us a glimpse into history As I stated earlier, the media of filmmaking had only been around for less than 40 years at this point, so much of what we see from the silent era was cinema when it was still in its infancy, a time when they didn't have plugins or software to pull off anything they could imagine. So everything we see from this era in film history, whether it's the special effects of Haxan or the air battles in Wayne's, they were all learning as they went along. But I also have a more personal reason for why I love this film. For those who don't know, I'm a Satanist, specifically an atheistic Satanist. So I don't literally believe in the devil or worship demons. For me, they're a metaphor for ideas like individuality, critical thinking, bodily autonomy, and diversity. One of the main ways I currently practice my religion is appreciating media that promotes those types of ideas. And if there's one genre of film that fits into those ideas, it's horror. Especially in regards to the classic monster movies from the early 20th century. Haxan specifically, I think, is a great example of quote-unquote satanic media, if you will, both in terms of its depiction of demons just being themselves and having a good time, and also its plea for viewers to question authority and not accept superstitious thoughts without questioning. I also find this film oddly comforting, and here's why I say that. I live in the Midwest, where everyone and everything around me is Christian. Like, my town has maybe 4,000 people at most, but 12 Christian churches. That is how Christian we are. And while I personally have never been Christian and obviously have nothing against anyone who practices Christianity, it does get annoying seeing it shoved in my face on a consistent basis. So it's nice when I'm able to either watch movies like Haxan or listen to bands like Ghost, where I'm able to embrace a religion that isn't centered on outdated and, depending on who you're talking to, problematic beliefs. And if you're interested in learning more about Satanism, I have a couple videos about it linked below, along with the rest of my sources, of course. But wait a minute, did I really just make a video on silent movie history to have an excuse to nerd out about my religion? Yes. Yes, I did. Upon its release in 1922, Haxan was met with a combination of praise and censorship. While critics acknowledged the film's technical prowess and creativity, many were also fast to decry its portrayal of demons and witchcraft. With one critic from Variety writing, "Wonderful though this picture is, it is absolutely unfit for public exhibition." Another critic from Copenhagen condemned its satanic, perverted cruelty that blazes out of it. Now, despite this, it would be re-released over the years. Once in 1914 featuring an introduction from Christiansen himself, and another time being in the 60s with a cut-down version titled Witchcraft Throughout the Ages. And instead of a traditional silent film, it was given a narration by author William S. Burroughs and a jazz soundtrack, which was a choice. And like a bunch of silent films, it's thankfully gained a new audience over time, mainly for its role in cinema history, but also for its spooky and imaginative world. It's a film that stands alongside Caligari, Nosferatu, and Phantom of the Opera as essential horror films from the 1920s. Like I said, it also has a special place in my heart for being a great piece in my personal satanic journey, encouraging viewers to be curious, question authority, and actually try to understand the world around us. Thank you for watching, and hail Satan.